Hi everyone. I've just about finished marking your assessment too, so I thought I'd give you a bit of feedback, some fairly specific feedback about how you've written the assessment, because I think assessment 3 is so similar that it will be quite helpful for you. And it'll also explain a little bit about the feedback that I have given you on your actual assessment. So in front of you, I've got a list that you can see that I've made notes, and I'm just going to go through it, and perhaps you can take your own notes if you have questions to ask later on. I'm sorry about the light in here, but unfortunately I have, if I close the windows, it ends up getting a little bit dark. Anyway, I'm sure you don't need to see me to be able to understand what I'm saying. Okay. Choosing your resource is absolutely essential. It is the difference between being able to do a good analysis or not. And it really is important where you get it from, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. But I'll give you an example of probably the best resource that I saw in the last assessment, and that was the game of Guess Who. Part of the reason was it fulfills the requirements of really pushing children to have to use effective oral language. And it's probably a resource that many of you wouldn't have thought of. So I just want you to think in terms of simplicity more than anything else. It's not actually about how complex the resource is, but it's about whether or not it enables you to respond to the assessment question. That's the most important thing, and I'll expand on that in a moment. So what's wrong with going to Pinterest or Teachers Pay Teachers? There is nothing wrong with it, except for the fact that you probably can't find who the author is and verify their efficacy in terms of who are they? Do they have the right kind of expertise to be able to put these resources up there? Yes, they may, but it's quite difficult for you to actually find out who they are. And I can tell you that because I actually submit stuff to Teachers Pay Teachers, but my name is not on there. And that's something I'm actually going to change from having done this, because I think it's important that people know what your actual credentials are. Asking me if it's okay, I'm already getting the is it okay question in terms of your resource, and I have been quite generous in my feedback in trying to get you to understand that yes or no, it may or may not be okay. You have to really make that judgment yourself, because, and I'll go back to the Guess Who resource, two people could use that resource and I could say to you, yeah, that's a great resource, because in my head I have, wow, you could do this, that and the other thing. But unless I know what you're actually going to do with it, it's not a great resource. So I can't give you really good guidance. What you need to do is go back to the rubric and say to yourself, if I choose this resource, will it allow me to do this and this and this and this, which is a requirement of the actual assessment that you're doing? So it's something that you really need to make that decision yourself. If you say to me, Paula, I've chosen this resource because it does X, Y, and Z, I can then say to you, wow, that sounds like it fits the bill, but I do need that extra bit of information. Beware of choosing from blogs and other unreferenced sites, and this has got a little bit to do with Pinterest as well. Once again, blogs don't necessarily tell you what the person who's writing it may be just somebody who has a strong opinion about something. It doesn't really give you a strong reference to call on. And that links into my next point, and that is using commercial sites to support your thesis. Now, some people went to blog sites to get to get resources. There's nothing wrong with that essentially, apart from what I've just mentioned. However, what you then did was use that blog or a place like Scholastic, and I'll explain that in a moment, to support your thesis. So you use them as a reference. Now, the problem with that is that a place like Scholastic is a commercial organisation. Of course, they're going to say that their resource fits certain requirements. So they're not a good resource to use as a reference because they're simply selling you something. So by all means use it if you think it fits the requirements, but if you're claiming something that it says it's doing, you need to go outside of the resource to actually get a reference to do that. Reference correctly and make sure that your link is live. And I'll refer back to why this is important a little bit later on at the end. A lot of your references I had trouble actually finding because they either didn't work or the reference wasn't live. Unfortunately, with web links, they often shift. So what you're better off doing is actually taking a screenshot and giving me the screenshot as well as the URL, because then I can actually go off and type in the name of the resource, and I can, in that way, I can find it. Okay, the other issue that you had, many of you had, is using passive voice. Passive voice is a number of things, but one of it is where you're referring to a noun as a pronoun. You're saying, this means that you can do such and such, or this is why, da-di-da-di-da. In one sentence, I actually had it said 5 times. What happens is that meaning is lost. I don't know what this is or the it that you're referring to. So you need to actually either rephrase the sentence or go back and use the actual thing that you're talking about so that it's clear as to what your message is. The teaching of oral language, rather than saying teaching oral language, so the teaching of is passive voice. Teaching oral language is more straightforward. It just reads better. It's a better way of writing. And so this is also called object construction. You put the most important thing first, and it's usually the subject. It's usually the person that you're talking about or the thing that is most important. So the teaching isn't the most important thing. Oral language is the most important thing. So that's what goes at the front. Using idioms, this is something I have never seen come up in an essay ever before, and it has come up many times through these assessments, telling me that a student is at somewhere. Sorry, my phone just went off then and I was trying to work out where it was coming from. Telling me that something is at, a student is at, I am assessing to find out where the student is at, and also saying, that being said, they're idioms. It's oral language coming into written language, and it's not appropriate in an academic writing. In fact, it's not appropriate in most writing. So just make sure that idioms don't make it into your essays, because it really does detract from your scholarly voice. Description versus analysis. This is a really tough one because it's a huge part of your essay, and it is essential that you understand the difference between description and analysis. In fact, after this, I'll post a little workshop thing that you can do to really work through and eliminate this from your next assessment. Description is usually fact. Analysis is substantiated opinion. It's where I am putting forward a premise and here's how I can support it. Whereas with description, you're saying, here's what the resource actually does. And if you're concerned that you maybe don't know what a description is, think about an app description. You go into the App Store, you look at the app, and you check on the description and you say, well, from that description, would I actually buy this thing? And sometimes you might then go off into the review and have a look. But generally, particularly if it's an app that you have to pay for, you have to rely on the description to decide whether or not it's worth buying. Well, think of that in terms of your resource. Is it worth going to the trouble of analysing this thing if it doesn't have a good description? Is it worth me reading on? So you've kind of got to sell your resource to me. Editing. Editing only works if you don't do it. You cannot edit your own work. It's why people who write have editors. So even if you have to pay somebody to edit your work, get somebody to read it through, show them the essay or the assessment outline, and even if they pick up half of your spelling errors or punctuation errors, it will be better than a lot of what I'm reading at the moment. There are a lot of what they term in tennis unforced errors. So I'd really, really invite you to do what you need to get this done. Don't forget that there is help through the university to have your work edited before you submit it. The word use versus utilise, just don't ever use utilise. That's a really good way to go. It kind of sounds like you're trying to be more academic when you use utilise, but in actual fact it's incorrect. Use is a great word, and I'll say that for every other word, in fact, that you use in your writing. Keep it simple. I like straightforward writing. Straightforward writing gets the message through. So don't try and be fancy. Just write nice and simply and make sure you support what you're saying. If you're going to use the curriculum codes, give me more information. Don't just say this resource meets Australian Curriculum Code, da-di-da-di-da. Give me what the code is, because that way I don't have to go away and look up what you're actually referring to. It puts the onus on you to communicate rather than me to make meaning. Adapting the resources, the rubric actually says a range of insightful strategies discussed that enable the resources to be used for a wide variety of student needs. Now, what a lot of you interpreted that as being, let's demonstrate how this resource can be used in other areas of English. That isn't what I'm looking for. What I'm looking for is, can you appreciate the different children that you're going to have in front of you, and can you adapt this resource to meet their oral language needs? So stick to the actual topic. Don't go flying off. Some people actually wrote that it was a good resource for geography, and it may well be, but that's not what I'm interested in when I'm looking at this particular assessment. So for your next assessment, stick to reading and writing, because that's all I'm assessing. Cherishing the reader. This is the last thing I want to say about your assessments. At the end of the day, the buck stops with me. I am the person who is determining whether or not your work is a high distinction or a fail or anything in between. So you need to look after me. And by saying that, I mean, edit your work well. Get it into the discussion board and make sure you're fully informed about what it is that this assessment requires. Make sure that you contribute to collaborate. Get on, and if you can't make the collaborate sessions, at least listen to what is discussed in collaborate. And please ask questions. I am really, really good at being here for you. And I would love to answer the questions that you have. That being said, I've also, now you notice how I've said, that being said, because I'm having an oral discussion with you, please don't put it in